anyone help me understand how an adult man loses a freaking dry palette? I'm in a one-bedroom apartment. There's not many places I can go. I live by myself, and my dog doesn't have opposable thumbs. So, where the heck did my dry palette go? My wonderful dry palette that I've used for almost a year, maybe, that I love? I don't know. I've been looking for it so I can start on this project. It's going to require a lot of dry brushing. And I have no idea what I did with this thing. Has anyone else in the history of anything ever lost a dry palette? Looks like this, right? It's covered in paint. The good news is that I bought some replacements earlier because I wanted to try out a variety of dry palettes. I bought some stuff to make my own because I figured, let's give that a shot. But then I thought, well, I also want to try out what else is out there on the market. I know the one I have, well, the one I had is pretty good. But what about some other ones? So I went to eBay and picked up a couple, and I guess now I kind of have to do this test video, huh? So, hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George, and I lose dry palettes, apparently. Yeah, I wish I was joking about losing the dry palette. I have no idea where it is. I looked everywhere around my hobby space, and I just can't. Alright, I'm going to clear my mind, because I've got two dry palettes. They look like this. I got them on eBay. And I've been looking for other dry palettes for a little bit because I love the Artis Opus dry palette that I have, but it's a piece of wood about yay big, and I think I paid something like $15 for it. I checked recently, and it's like $10, which isn't bad. But the thing about these dry palettes is that they're made of like MDF board, and the layers of paint kind of pile on, and the more paint you have on these, the less deep the texture part of the texture palette it gets shallow, and it gets not as good at removing the excess paint from your dry brush, which is right here. It's not a cigar, it's a dry brush. Although I kind of want to. Does this make me look cool? Am I cool now? Am I cool? Alright, enough goofing around. Let's take a look at these dry palettes. I got two. This one, right here, is made of, I think it's plastic. And it feels like it's 3D printed, and as a matter of fact, yeah, I do see some of the 3D printing, kind of the lines that a filament printer will leave behind. It's got a nice kind of heft to it, but the most interesting thing about it is all the patterns that are on here. I think all of these neat little patterns and textures is going to help kind of introduce some control to how much paint I remove. I don't know that for a fact because I've never used anything quite like this, so we'll see how this works. I should point out that it is plastic, but it comes pre-primed. You'll notice this is the color of the plastic, the material that it's made of, and it's kind of a weird texture, which is why it threw me off initially. This is what it looks like on the other side. So the person who sold it to me has primed it with some black primer. So I don't know what priming does in this case. It makes sense if it's wood, like my other dry palette, but okay, cool. We'll check it out. The other dry palette that I got is also made of wood, but this isn't, I don't think this is MDF. I think this is a different kind of material. You'll notice there's this glossy, smooth side on the back, and in the front, it's got all these little patches of texture. Although I will say that the texture isn't as deep as I thought. This, for example, is very, very fine. So is this. This is rough, like this has some depth to it, and I can see this removing some paint, but there's a lot of smooth area on this dry palette, and I just don't know how well it's going to work. You know what? I have it upside down, and you can see the creator Jazz Creations. So I'm going to test this out too. It also came pre-primed, so this is not my doing. The person who made this primed it with some black primer. So as I apply my dry brushing technique to at least the interior portion, the mechanical parts of this model, I'm going to use these two primers, not because I have to, but because I want to, okay? Yeah. Alright, let's ruin some texture palettes, shall we? Okay. Let's talk about this texture palette from, I guess, Jazz Creations. That's what's etched into the board itself. You know, I didn't have high hopes for this because the texturing seemed a little shallow, but I kind of like it. It's going to take some getting used to this because it feels different from my other texture palette, the Artis Opus that I usually use. And I didn't expect to feel a difference. I basically kind of thought a texture palette is a texture palette is a texture palette. That wasn't as hard to say as I thought. But this does feel a little different. And the shallow texturing I thought was going to be a problem, but it's not. It catches a lot more paint than I thought. It leaves my dry brush feeling, well, pretty dry. And I think it's a little bit more predictable, the dryness that this imparts to my dry brush, than even my other dry palette. Now, that might be because my other dry palette has been used to hell and back. So the texture is fairly shallow, and so it's maybe not grabbing as much paint as I'd like. This is grabbing, at least when it's new, it's grabbing a lot of paint and it's taking it off the brush, and it's making my brush strokes very predictable, which is unusual for me, and I appreciate that. Now, having said that, it's the first time I've used this, and there's a lot of texture areas that I have not used. What I'm doing is I'm adding the paint to these kind of smooth spots which are all over the board, using that to maybe do some pre-mixing, and also using that to kind of stage, and then I move my brush over to these kind of rougher textures kind of sequentially to get more and more paint off the brush. And the number of places that I dry the brush on kind of leaves it more and more dry. One of the things I did notice about the board that I was less than happy with, when right before I started using it, I took a kind of a closer look to it, and the priming on this board was a little thin, and I noticed that that it was kind of coming off on my dry brush, not when it was loaded, but when it was a little dry. And I don't know if you can tell or if you're going to be able to tell, but here's what the dry brush looks like. I know, it's already pretty messed up. It's a little on the damp side, and I'm going to brush it on this area, which is paint-free. Oh. So would you look at that? The primer kind of came off of my dry brush. It's just water on here, and you can kind of see, this is the place on the board where I dried it. You can kind of see the material underneath. So it could be that the primer isn't great, or maybe that the primer doesn't adhere very well to the surface. You see how glossy it is. So maybe if you decide to get a board like this, maybe do your own priming or hit it again, because the prime that's on here, I just don't know. I don't know how important it is. Maybe it's just a detail, but I don't want it coming off on my brush, so I'm probably going to hit it with some black primer. I do have some textured black primer that might work even better than what's on here. Okay, so first impressions, not bad. I'd spend the money on this again, but maybe I'd prime it before I use it. You know, prime it myself. Okay, I'm going to try this guy next. This is the one that's made out of plastic. And I don't know if you can see this, but it's kind of thin, and the texturing is pretty aggressive, and it leaves... Here, let me show you. See if I get this little... Yes. So you see how it's backlit? And this is how I noticed it, because I have kind of bright lights here in my area. And there's some places where you can see through. Now, it isn't going to be necessarily a problem, but it might be a little on the thin side And I don't know for a fact that's going to be a problem, but I'm a little concerned about the durability of this texture palette over the long haul. I don't have any concerns about it being okay the first couple of tries, but I don't know. I mean, time will tell, right? So, before I actually start, I just washed this dry brush that collected a bunch of the primer from the other one. Let's see if the same thing happens here. So it's a little damp. I'm going to hit it in this area right here. So I don't see any obvious primer left over on my brush. So I'm going to wash that off again. And I didn't see any obvious area where the primer was coming off the plastic. So I think the other texture palette maybe needs different primer, or maybe it needs a less glossy surface on the actual board material before they start modifying it for dry brushing. So I'm going to load this up, and I know that this is what it's for, but I always feel really gross. It happened to me with the Artis Opus dry palette. It kind of happened to me with this one I just tried, and it's happening to me right now where I'm getting ready to add this paint onto my texture palette so that I could use it. And I feel weird about ruining it with paint. It's the whole purpose I bought it. But right now it's pristine, it's clean, it's the best it's ever gonna be, and the moment I start using it, it's going to be less than that. And someday, it's going to be useless. I know I'm going to have to buy another one, and I'm going to feel kind of weird about that too. That is, of course, unless I somehow happen to lose this one too, which is apparently a thing. Yeah, as I've been filming this, I've been kind of roaming around. I still can't find the thing. There's nowhere for it to hide, yet somehow it eludes me. Don't get old, guys. Don't get old. Alright, so I've taken this through its paces, you know, the beginning paces, and it works pretty okay. It certainly feels different from, well, this guy. This guy seems to dry the paint a bit more aggressively than this guy. This one's a little wetter than this, but it's still a good dry brush palette or texture palette. It doesn't seem to absorb the paint the way this guy does. So maybe there's something to that. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy with this dry palette. I'm honestly perfectly happy using either one of these. I don't know that it makes a difference. Maybe the difference between them is durability. The real question is whether or not I like this more than the Artis Opus dry palettes. And honestly, it's too soon to tell. And in terms of prices, all three of them are kind of in the same area. I will say that I think I like the texturing on these a little better. The texturing is more aggressive, it's deeper, so it's probably going to last you a little bit longer than the Artis Opus. So maybe in terms of value, these will be around a lot longer, but it's conjecture, right? Because I've used the Artis Opus for about a year. I've used these for literally a single painting session and not a full project yet. So it's too really soon to tell, but if you're looking for a texture palette, these aren't bad ways to go. I wouldn't recommend them over the Artis Opus, but I wouldn't recommend the Artis Opus over these either. I think these are contenders. So your decision is going to be a highly personal one. Maybe you like Artis Opus, like their YouTube channel, and maybe all the other kind of instructional stuff that they do. I know they helped me a ton with my dry brushing. I'm still nowhere near as good as them, but they taught me how to dry brush when I was doing it wrong. So buying the Artis Opus dry brush or the texture palette is a good way of saying, hey guys, thank you for all that you do. Here's a few bucks, right? There's a huge value in that. On the other hand, these are pretty good too. I think one of these came from the United States, the other one came from Canada, so there's international shipping, so there's that to consider. And these people, so far as I know, aren't content creators. They're not teaching you how to do any painting. So, but in terms of price, in terms of actual utility, I think all three of them are relatively the same. And I got silver paint all over my fingers because of course I did. So the decision of which of these to buy doesn't matter. Get any of these. They're great. Unless you have other considerations to use when you're making your purchase, like supporting a content creator. And maybe the only difference between something like this, and something like the Artis Opus is that I'm hoping maybe these are somehow way less losable. I don't know. I'm acting like it's Artis Opus's fault, and I'm going to stick to that. That's all I've got. I hope this inspired you to get a dry palette. Which one you get, doesn't matter. Just get one. It will improve your dry brush painting. Unless you're already really, really good. And even then, it might help you exert a bit more control over the amount of paint on your brush. So I recommend getting a texture palette. Which one, doesn't matter, but get one. It might help you become a better painter. Now, do you know of another texture palette that I didn't see in my purchasing? Or do you have a preferred one? Do you have a strong preference for the Artis Opus and are just dying to tell me why I'm wrong? Let me know in the comments. I am open to this discussion because honestly, I don't really know, but I'd love to hear from you. So, this has been Your Average Bear Gaming. I have been George. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace. I found it! I found it. I'd finished all the recording for the video, and I found it. I moved the box that I swore I checked it. I moved it and it fell out, hit the carpet. Here it is. My Artis Opus texture palette. I missed you, baby. I missed you so much.